There's a gray shape on a reed at the edge of the pond and your eyes slide right past it. It's dawn. You're looking up out over the water, scanning the air because that's where you expect to find a dragonfly. That blue and glass blur stitching back and forth above the lily pads. That's the one you know. That's the one you'd photograph. That's the one you'd call beautiful. But the thing on the reed isn't flying. It's climbing, slow, deliberate, dragging itself up out of the water on 6 hooked legs still dripping. Mud-colored. Easy to miss. You'd call it a beetle or nothing at all. Kneel down. The real story starts lower than you're looking because that gray climber is the dragonfly. Not a different animal, the same one. And the bright-winged creature you've been admiring your whole life? That's the last page. You've been reading the last page and calling it the book. Here's what almost no one ever sees. The dragonfly, you know, spends only a few weeks in the air. Before that, for months, sometimes for years, it lived down here. Underwater. In the dark, soft world, at the bottom of the pond where the light goes green and thick and the surface above turns into a ceiling. And down there, it was never gentle. Down there, it was one of the most efficient hunters in the whole pond. Let me show you the first chapter. The one no one reads. It doesn't chase. That's the first thing to understand. It settles into the silt or hangs still among the stems, the same color as everything around it, and it waits, sometimes for hours. The whole pond drifts by overhead, and the nymph is just another scrap of debris, another smear of mud until it isn't. When something finally comes close, it doesn't lunge with its whole body the way a fish would. It barely twitches. Most of it stays perfectly still, committed to the disguise, and lets one part of itself do all the work. Watch the head. Just under the face, folded up like a clenched fist, there's a second jaw. Biologists call it the labium, a hinged, mask-like arm that the nymph keeps tucked away out of sight, waiting. Above it, the eyes are always working 2 dark domes that miss almost nothing in the murk. A mosquito larva drifts past. A wriggling tadpole. A small fish. Even if the nymph is large enough, and the fish is slow enough. And then there. Did you see it? Look again because you almost certainly didn't. In a 2021 study by Kundanati and colleagues, high-speed cameras measured that strike, and the folded jaw shoots out and snaps back in under 1/5 of a second, faster than you can blink, faster than your eye can hold. One moment the prey is there, the next it's gone, drawn back into the jaws, and the nymph hasn't even seemed to move. And it isn't muscle that does it. Not the way you'd think. The nymph pumps pressure through its own body, the walls of its abdomen squeezing like a fist, and a tiny spring-loaded joint holds the tension, then lets go all at once. The jaw doesn't push. It launches, and it knew the moment was coming before you did. Fine sensors line that folded jaw, reading the water for the smallest stir, so that by the time something swims close enough, the nymph has already measured it. It isn't guessing in the dark. It's feeling the water and waiting for the math to be right. And then it does it again. And again. A single nymph will run that strike countless times before it ever leaves the water, each one a small, silent catch that nothing above the surface ever hears. The pretty pond you picture as a calm, scenic thing is down at this level a quiet and constant hunt. Now look at the rest of it, because the same body that fires that jaw is doing something just as strange to stay alive. It's breathing through the wrong end. Deep inside the nymph, near the tip of the abdomen, there's a chamber lined with delicate folds. Gills tucked away inside the body, where the water can reach them. The nymph draws water in, pulls the oxygen out of it, and pushes the water back out. In and out. That's how it breathes down in the green dark. No surfacing, no gulp at the top like a fish rising. Everything it needs it pulls straight from the water, without ever breaking the surface you're standing over. Stand at the edge long enough and you'd never guess. The water looks calm, ornamental, half asleep. But just beneath it, breath is being drawn and pushed over and over by a body you cannot see. And when it needs to move, when something larger comes looking, it forces that water out in a single hard pulse. Mill and Pickard back in 1975 clocked it. The nymph can fire those pulses more than twice a second and shoot itself backward through the water like a held breath suddenly let go. It doesn't kick or thrash. It just fires one clean jet into the dark. So sit with that for a second. The same chamber that lets it breathe also lets it flee. The same pressure that powers its escape powers the jaw that feeds it. One body doing 3 impossible things at once in a puddle you'd step over without a thought. And this is where the whole thing turns over. This isn't a phase. This is the life. According to the Missouri Department of Conservation, a dragonfly nymph can live like this for a few months or, depending on the species and the water, for several years. Down in the mud hunting, growing, while above it the seasons turn over and over. It can't grow the way you do in a smooth line. It's locked inside its own shell, so to get bigger, it has to climb out of itself, splitting its skin and stepping free, soft and new, then hardening again. It does this over and over, more than a dozen times across its underwater life. Each time, a slightly larger hunter steps out of the smaller one's empty husk, and each of those molts is its own quiet gamble. For a little while after it splits the old skin, the new body is soft. And a soft nymph is a slow nymph, easy for something else to take. So it tucks itself away into the weeds, into the dark, and waits to harden before it dares to hunt again. Even down here, in its own element, becoming is the dangerous part. Think about what that means. A nymph that hatched the summer you last sat by that pond might still be down there right now, 2 summers later, hunting in the same green dark. Ice can close over the surface in winter, and it keeps going underneath, slow and patient in the cold. The pond freezes and thaws, fills with frogs, and empties again, and all the while the nymph just keeps stepping out of itself, a little larger each time. So when you do the math, the weeks of flight against the years in the water, the truth lands quietly. The winged dragonfly isn't the animal. It's the curtain call. The nymph is the animal. It has already done almost all of its living and almost all of its killing long before it ever sees the sky. Which brings us back to the reed. To dawn. To that gray climber dripping. This is the one and only time it will ever leave the water. After months, maybe years of breathing through a chamber in its belly, it crawls up a stem into a world it has never breathed in, and it does not go back. There is no returning to the pond. The water was the whole world. And now the whole world is being left behind. Everything it has ever known is water. Cold, green, heavy, pressing in from every side. And it is about to trade all of it for the exact opposite, for thin air and open light and a sky it has only ever seen as a wrinkled ceiling overhead. No animal makes a bigger move than this, and it makes it alone in silence on a single stem at dawn. Watch it stop. It clamps its legs to the reed and goes still. From the outside, nothing. But everything is about to change. A split opens along its back, slowly, and it is slow. This is not a quick thing. Something pulls itself up and out through that crack, pale, crumpled, wings like wet paper folded too many times. It rests half in and half out of its old skin, gripping the husk of everything it used to be. It trembles. The whole body shivers as fluid pushes outward, a little at a time, into limbs that have never once been used. There is no rushing this. It has to find its new shape on its own time, and the first light of the morning catches it while it's still wet and unfinished, swaying on the reed. And these are the most dangerous minutes of its entire life. For years, it was armored, hidden faster than your eye. Now it hangs in the open air, soft and pale, and barely able to move, its wings still crumpled and useless. Anything could take it. It survived years underwater to arrive defenseless at the surface, and all it can do is hold on and wait for its own body to harden. This is the costume change between the acts. The gills, the jet, the folded jaw, all of it stays behind an empty shell still clinging to the reed, and out of it comes the other body entirely. Long wings, huge eyes built for air and light instead of mud and dark. It pumps fluid into those wings until they stiffen and gleam. And then, in its own time, it lifts off the reed for the first time and becomes the only version of itself you ever knew existed. You arrived for the final scene. An audience that came in late, clapping for the last few minutes of a story that ran for years in a theater you never looked into. Here's the thing, though. The story leaves a receipt. That empty shell on the reed, the split husk, the dragonfly crawled out of it, stays there. Sometimes for weeks, clamped to the stem just above the waterline light, as a flake of nothing. It's called an exuvia, and it is the most overlooked object at the edge of any pond in the country. Because it's proof that right there on that reed, an entire underwater life ended and an aerial one began. That a creature breathed through its own body for years in the dark below, then climbed up and stepped out of itself into the air and left the old self behind, still gripping the stem. The receipt is hanging right there at ankle height, and almost no one has ever bent down to read it. Pick one up sometime gently, and you'll feel how little is left. A papery mask, the thin outline of legs, the seam down the back where it broke open. It weighs almost nothing now, but it carried a hunter through years of dark water, and it held the shape of that hunter right up until the morning it didn't need to anymore. So here's the only homework I'll ever give you. Next time you're near still water, a pond, a slow creek, the muddy edge of a lake, don't look up at the dragonflies in the air. Look down. Look at the reeds just above the waterline, and look at the water just below them. You might find a gray climber on its one great journey up. You might find an empty husk still gripping the stem, the ghost of a life that just changed worlds. You might find nothing the first time, and that's fine. Kneel down anyway, because the real story was never up in the light where you were looking. It was always lower. It was always down in the dark years deep, long before the wings. Tell me what you find down there. I want to know what's been living under the surface you've been walking past your whole life.